was in the spring of the year. I was 9 years old. Would have been 10 years old that year. It was in Magoffin County, right where Wolf, Breathitt, and Magoffin meet. And I had been traveling, coming from my aunt's house. I had been over there across the mountain to her house spend the night with my cousins. I had done that occasionally, and I knew the road back through the woods to get home. The woods were really dense. Nobody lived within miles and miles and miles of the area. It was just very wooded and very dense. And I was walking down in the hollow. I was singing little songs from stuff I'd heard at school and stuff, and I was just going through there, just skipping along and hopping along and singing songs. I had just jumped over a rattlesnake that was laying across me in the road. I saw it laying there, and I just jumped over it, and all of a sudden I smelled something really funny. It smelled like something dead, or something that was just like dead dog hair or wet dog, or it just it didn't smell right. And I felt, and I got this overwhelming notion that something was staring at me. I was being looked at with sort of like eyes that wasn't quite what they should be. I glanced up at the right, up at the top of the hill, because that's where my attention was. And standing there, I just stood there, and I sort of turned my head and looked at it. It's like, well, what is it? It was very tall. It had hair. It had a ape-like face, but it had more like a human ape mix. It had eyes, dark, dark eyes, wide nose. The shoulders weren't really broad, but it was sort of a slimmer one, maybe slimmer one. And it was just standing there. It was just hairy all over. It was standing there. And our eyes met. And he stared at me, and I stared at him for, well, I don't know how long it was. It might have been minutes. We just staring at each other. I guess he couldn't figure out what a little tiny blonde-headed girl was doing walking in the middle of the woods by herself. I guess he couldn't figure that one out. And all of a sudden, something snapped in him, and he jumped behind the tree really fast. He just sort of, and that would make somebody think he was vanishing if they didn't watch, because he was really fast. They were just like that. He was just behind that tree. And that shook me up, and I said, whoa, this ain't the place I need to be. I took off a running. I hit that road. It was about 3 miles before we get to our house up in the head of Johnson Fork in Magoffin County. And I ran all the way home. I burst in the door. I said, Mom, I saw something. I saw some kind of man. I don't know if he was a man or not, but he sure was hairy. I don't know what it was, Mom. I don't know. And she said, hush, hush. Don't talk to your dad. Don't say no to your dad. He will get, my dad was a very nice man. But I didn't. Later, a couple of years later, I heard stories from my dad about my grandpa, John Ryle Montgomery. Lived up in the area too. He had built a cabin after he come back from Leslie County in the 1920s. He had built a cabin up in there in the head of nowhere, and he had built the chimney out of rock, just fieldstone. And he said he told the tales of every year. It was sort of in the spring of the year, between March and May. He would always come through that area. And he said he would find them, he would be knocking, he'd be in the house, and they'd come knocking on his chimney, just bang, bang, bang. And they would make hooting noises like they were laughing at him, like, you can't get us, we're big. And he would see them going off into the woods, and he says, and he always said, I weren't going after him, I weren't that dumb. But that was that, and, that's pretty well, except for the screams and howls I've heard in the woods and stuff, and the bangs and the knocks and the screams.
When did you hear the screams and the
The
knocks?
screams were 10, 9. I was 15 when I heard that. It was 5 years later is when I heard the screams. The screams are just like the screams that you hear when but these screams, it went on for hours. They were sorrow. I could swear I could hear the pain in this animal's voice, and this animal's sound of its voice. It sounded like it was something had died, or a child had died, or something was it was or something happened to one of them, and it was just and it banging and knocking and screams. And I think there was another answering how from the before. I heard a couple of answering ones too, and it was just like the world. That woods up there was had a pack of them, and they were just lost somebody that they really something they really treasured.
Yeah.
The pain in their voice, the pain in that voice was I can't I just really remember that.
You said earlier that you would hear knocking as well.
Yeah, I've heard knocking on the well, that house that we lived in Johns. I've heard knocking there. I've heard knocking at Dad's other part of the county. I've heard we've heard stuff in the woods, and I've heard stuff like that all my life, but I never did I never told anybody this story until I was grown.
No. The screams though, you mentioned, I think you mentioned you heard knocking during the screams.
Yes. It's like they were raging about something, a loss of some kind. It
Yeah.
was just horrible. I mean, you should have heard. The woods were, it's like it was alive with their knocks and bangs and screams and cries.
Yeah, it's significant when you get the screaming and the knocking together.
What does that mean?
Well, not sure, but it points more towards a Bigfoot type behavior to get the combinations
Oh yeah,
of
it was.
vocals with
Yeah.
knocks.
It was definitely. It was just you could hear the loss. It was something. They were grieving over something, or they
Yeah.
were raging over something.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you told me the story, you said you were a little blonde hair girl,
White hair, I had white blonde hair all the way to my waist.
long white blonde hair,
Yeah.
and you were singing songs,
Yeah,
walking through the woods, just like Goldilocks.
yeah, skipping along, jumping over snakes, jumping over rocks, making noise.
And that Bigfoot was watching you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it been. It come closer, I guess, until I could smell it.
Yeah. What I love about the story, the Bigfoot did not hurt you.
No, it didn't.
It just watched you. And it adds to some of my beliefs that children tend to attract curious Bigfoots that like to watch. You're non-threatening. You have a sweet voice. You're singing songs. So you do get a lot of curious Bigfoots observing children and singing, and so that adds to my belief that we should do that as researchers. Go out, use children as bait, or sing songs, and do things to attract them, which we do. We do a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for the interview. It's fabulous. I think people are going to enjoy this.
Thank you, sir. And this is a true story. I am not embellishing. I haven't added anything, or I haven't said nothing that I did not really actually witness.
Yes, I appreciate you going on camera, and I know you mentioned this. I don't know if you wanted to mention this, but tell us why you didn't want to go on camera though.
Well, I've been going to the dentist, and they've been working on my teeth, and they're going to do an implant. Well, the one before had fallen out this morning when I was getting ready to come here, and I'm going like, but I'm going to go to the Bigfoot conference. I got a tooth missing in front. Now I'm going to look like a snaggle-tooth witch.
Yeah, and I understand. That's definitely something that I would be conscious of too. And but I appreciate you at least letting us videotape some of you and share the story, though. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.